Welcome to this week's episode of Moonbeaming. I am so happy to be here with you discussing one of my favorite topics, interpretations through archetypal language, otherwise known as a teaching lesson about a tarot card. If you're joining me here for the first time, welcome. My name is Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. I am an artist and thinker. Currently, I run a creative and spiritual art studio called The Moon Studio. We create intentional tools, products, services, educational offerings centered in connecting you back to yourself. Gifts that help you develop your intuition, your creativity, and help you to live out your true nature and experience your zone of genius just a little bit more often. Right now, we are in our busiest time of the year, like many small businesses, because the 2023 Many Moons lunar and astrological and spiritual guide is here. We are shipping them. If you are interested in getting a psychic planner, one filled with a couple books, because it's 276 pages, several books worth of resources, tarot spreads, spells, rituals, prompts in a completely functional planner with weekly and monthly overviews, then this is for you. You can click on the link in the show notes to get your own copy. If you enjoy my teachings, my forecasts, my shares here, if they resonate with you, you will love this guide because it's like this podcast in a book that you can just have on your bedside table or coffee table or backpack or anywhere, really. Another thing I almost always forget to mention, my studio manager was reminding me that I almost never mention this, so I'm trying to get better at remembering to share, is number one, we have a Patreon. It keeps this podcast in existence. Thank you so much, patrons. You can support us by Googling Moon Studio Patreon. Super simple. If you love this podcast, you'll also love the Patreon because you get secret episodes, secret shares, more education, monthly spreads, and heads up on when my offerings open. You also get to be connected with awesome people. I love my patrons. Y'all are so cool. I wish I could hang out with all of you. Wellness Rave 2023. Maybe it's going to happen. You're all invited. So if that sounds fun, join the Patreon. The other thing I always forget to mention is that we have a whole entire store of offerings ranging from bespoke, precious gem jewelry talismans to handcrafted ritual oils to locally made, energetically infused votive candles to meditations to digital download workshops that are like a whole podcast episode on pyrite, you dig? So if you want to learn more from me at your own pace, choose a digital download or pick out the crystal for inner child healing or get a talisman of love and abundance or get one of our carefully crafted tarot perfumes, y'all. We made perfumes for lovers and the devil this year, and they are so amazing. So we know it's holiday season 2023. I am sure a friend of yours wants protection oil or a cozy sweatshirt that says RIP Patriarchy. So go shop at the Moon Studio. Everything is made ethically, locally. We know all our vendors. We know where things are made. We're really, really, really careful about what we make and why we make it, and you are sure to love all our offerings. Yes? Yes. All right. Now that you have a larger picture, a bigger snapshot of who I am currently and what I currently do, let's get into this week's episode, which is all about the Six of Swords. Let me begin with a reminder to check out the episodes on the Six of Wands and the Six of Cups first, probably. Like, you can hit pause and go check those out if you haven't already. If you also haven't listened to the episode on the Lovers, probably check that out as well first, because this will ground you in my cosmology and my frameworks and provide you with some foundation that I'm going to cruise through right now. Especially if you are new to deeper dives on tarot, like beyond keywords and Google searches and things like that. If you are new to the Golden Dawn School of Tarot Theory, which I pull from as well as my own life, my own research, my own scholarship, if you are new to numerology or how the correspondences of the elements infuse their way into the minor arcana, it would be good for you to start with some prior episodes. Having said all that, let's get into the Six of Swords. With the Six of Swords, we are looking at the combination of air, because swords is the air element, and six, which is recalibration and new vistas, new chapters, adjustments, healing, I would also say, and more. As we know, the way I teach the swords is that they are here to show us how to heal. And in particular, they are here to help us in the pursuits of ending unnecessary suffering, accessing levels and layers of consciousness, clear communication, clear transmissions, stepping into our most authentic self and experiencing that authenticity, aka ending superficial or conditioned or false identities and beliefs, so that we might express ourselves truly, which leads me to the big final theme, the truth. What is true, or what truths are there for us, and how do we discern that? In other words, the examination, the parsing apart, the unraveling, the putting back together of lies, narratives, myth, story, the mind, thoughts and beliefs, inspiration, innovation, imagination, ideas, so many I words, all of that lies in the realm of air, aka swords, breath. Think about the element of air, invisible, etheric, frequencies. These are all keywords. You can spend some time. We spend time in the elemental intuition class thinking about what each element means for us. And air is so rich. Air is so lovely and so layered. Another aspect of this suit I want to highlight here as being swords themes are ideas of conflict, non-duality versus duality, which seems a little bit ironic, I suppose, as I'm reading my bullet point, and perceptions and interpretations. The swords all highlight that. I recently read this tweet that said, "Always remember that people read your writing in their own voice. So be careful how you communicate. Perception and interpretation and communication are often what causes conflict and often what causes pain when we're so in our egos or in the past or in our defenses that we can't have mastery or control over our mind or our energy. We can't see what's really going on. We get derailed really easily by people's words, by people's actions, by spectrums of violence, right? Because a lot of violence happens not through wielding a sword, but through other means, you know? Sometimes when we see what's going on under the surface, but we cannot detach from it, that can also be swords, like attachments, being detached. These are all incredibly important themes. I haven't even touched upon the nervous system, breath, trauma, all of these interrelated ideas that are here. So important. Hanging out with the swords is so important for our healing, for our consciousness, for our growth. Because, as you know, spoiler alert, one of people's biggest problems is that they are living reactively and unconsciously and are in relationship predominantly with their pasts and with their fears, not purely in the present moment, not purely in present time, or in their future, or dancing with their future. And in the Six of Swords, we have the invitation to shift our gaze and choose where we want our attention to go. With time and practice, this rewires our neural pathways. The Six is where we start to take the wheel, as it were, of our own lives and minds and stories. And it is where we're being asked to make sacred choices. Not from the space of the Five of Swords. That's when we're in it. That's when we are like in it, attached, in the wound, in the Thunderdome, stressed out, and really mired in the past or in tight quarters. The Five of Swords is being so in a hard situation, suffering, pain, depression, the past. We can't switch our consciousness out into the observer mode, let alone our God self, our deepest self. We can't do that, and that helps us zoom out. If all you get from this episode is that, that's enough. And hopefully even by now you can understand why this card is so dear to me and is so important. A lot of people do not like the swords. They think they are bad or scary. I've heard a lot of folks criticize the Pamela Coleman Smith renditions because they're so graphic. But here's the thing, babe. There are a lot of things in life that are hard to look at. It's telling whether we avoid a challenging picture or a challenging time, or if we stay with it, if we stay with the trouble, as Joanna Macy would say. And some of those hardest cards depict those hard moments that end up preparing us to be our best, to be our most courageous, to set us up for that paradox that you can't be brave without there being something hard. We have to remember that the Six is the precursor to the sevens, which are major paradoxes that we encounter as we individuate. It is paradoxes that help us grow. So the sixes sort of have a little bit of that tension as we turn the page. And with this air element at play, there's this unseenness or invisibleness often to swords types of situations that we're in, where say only we see it. Only we can see the pattern, or it's a mutable situation. Like there could be a wide breadth of interpretation, like the tarot. Hello, right? Tarot is so swords. So often what the swords highlight are these more quiet internal processes or beliefs that end up having a large influence on our external world. So maybe when you pull the Six of Swords, it's not super intense. It's not super in your face. You might not even be sure what the card is asking of you. Maybe there's not a lot happening externally. So maybe this is an internal ask, a quieter ask. There's this theory about the element of air that it's projective, that it's masculine. I disagree with all of it. I think every element is both internal and external, is both masculine, feminine, all other genders, right? Because there's a lot of activity when we go internal. Maybe you realize you've been watching yourself or interpreting yourself through the eyes of a cruel world. Or you realize how you've self-sabotaged in certain situations and you're ready to change it. Maybe it's this quiet, quick realization that you don't want to have this thought pattern anymore, that it's time to create different neural pathways that over time, of course, will have a huge outcome in your world. So the Six of Swords invites us to have a different relationship with ourself, our mind, our thoughts. This archetype asks us to relate to ourselves differently, to relate to our story differently. That begins in the mind and consciousness, with our attention and our awareness. Whether it's relating to our pain or our fear differently, or simply by going into places with ourselves and others that are safer, that are more loving, more brilliant, more interesting. Turning towards the new, the different, the better, the more expansive, instead of falling back on particular baselines of self-flagellation or judgment or self-criticism, or maybe even self-hatred. As you probably know, the sixes are linked to Major Arcana number 6, the Lovers. We're in a 6 year, which is why I am placing a focus on the teachings and wisdom from this constellation, from the Lovers and the Sixes in this podcast, in my classes, in the curriculum I developed this year, in my own life. Lovers themes are major right now. By now, they are like probably screaming at all of us by the end of the year, right? These themes of lovers and the sixes, like moving, breakup, seeking, different choices, relationships, relating, love, joy, pleasure, art, learning, education, community, creating your own garden, so on and so on and so on and so forth. These themes are coming up so much for everyone. You are not alone. And this teaching of the Lovers and the Sixes that I've been sharing a ton about in my classes, because I've been trying to work with it as much as possible, that I think creates a really great foundation for us to start with also here, is this theory of consciousness that exists in many Eastern philosophies as well as Western ones, Right here, I'm thinking of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, for example. Bear with me, bear with me. And that is this idea of the self, the witnesser, the God self, or greater consciousness as different levels and layers within us, and as different aspects of the universe that we can relate to and access ourselves. When something gnarly is going down, or anything, a butterfly going in front of you, you're in it, you're in the moment, you're in relationship to whatever it is you're perceiving. And then there's the witnesser, the person that is witnessing you experiencing things. So who is behind who or what? Who or what is behind the witnesser? Is it us? Who is creating the observer? Or is it God, source, spirit, all, consciousness? Is it everything? Is it both? Is it all? And this dovetails into the invitation of the sixes as a reset, a recalibration, a different chapter, because we need a different level of consciousness or different state of consciousness to move and to make change. If we're really in our amygdala and we're flipping out, we're in a trauma response. We need to be in our frontal lobe. That could be another way for you to think of that. We need to relate to ourselves, not as our past self, not as what other people who couldn't even see us have labeled us as, but as our true self, our present self, our capital S self. And we need to imagine our future self, a loving, brilliant future self. Studies have shown that when we identify with a positive, capable, compassionate, brilliant future self version, like insert adjective here, of course, cute, charming, whatever your future self is, it's you. When we identify with these great aspects of a future self of us, it both heals trauma and creates the future. That's also Witchcraft 101. I love all these scientific findings that also underscore things that us witches or, Buddhists who created the most advanced psychological philosophy thousands of years ago. I'm digressing, but I love it when Western logical science is saying the same things that a lot of those of us who are into mysticism and have experienced magic or who meditate or visualize or who are Buddhists, we already know. I love that. It's great. It's great. It can be both and. It can be both and. So that's one ask of the Six of Swords. It's time to hit the brain gym and build new neural pathways. It's time to get into consciousness play. And in the words of the great Larage, let's think about play as a spontaneous exploration of sensation. Let's invoke our imaginations. And by invoking dreams, fantasies, we do begin to cut cords with an outdated past self, or the self that is no longer helpful to us, or a past we're ready to move on from. That's another theme or opportunity that this card presents us with. So how do we create different neural pathways? I've sort of already outlined some of that, but with practice, with attention, with awareness, the more dendrites there are that are connected to neurons, the more the frequency of the thought or the behavior repeats itself. The stronger these neural pathways get, the stronger these brain habits, I would say, become. So we want to also connect a new behavior to ideas of this present self, as well as conscious practice when we're doing old behaviors of affirmations. So visualization's great, affirmations are great. So are attaching positive emotions to the thought or visualization. So embodiment. Also emotionalizing the thought, That's a crucial part of spell or timeline jumping, is picturing what you're doing differently and bringing that joy or excitement into the visualization and into your body, into your cells. Another practice to try is thinking these positive affirmations as you're doing something that is neutral or you love, like walking or stretching or in the bath or playing with your dogs or whatever. Consciously practice thinking new thoughts, new stories, new ideas when you are not activated and when you're doing something you already like to do. Also, thinking about practice thoughts before stepping into something. Like athletes will visualize themselves before a game or a match. Study after study shows that this is effective. Thinking about practicing the piano and imagining yourself doing it, imagining yourself playing those beautiful keys, like running through scales or something. It's not as effective as actually practicing, but it is still much more effective than not. And I'm sure you can do some Googling and look this all up. Again, for the science of it all. So all of these kinds of brain strengthening or recovery exercises, learning new things like a language or computer program, learning new interpretations of life, philosophies, tarot cards, so on and so forth, we can think about when the Six of Swords comes up. Also, one way we cut cords, other than energetically and literally, I facilitate cord cuttings. I do cord cuttings fairly often in my life and my practice, is by changing the relationship we have to our past, bringing in more resource there, telling a different story, one that gives us agency. Agency is also not engaging with patterns that are linked to the past or an unhealthy version of ourselves, and moving on and leaving, which is often a hallmark of this card. Because why? Why is leaving, moving on, getting over something? Why is that a hallmark of the Six of Swords? Well, for one, we've been in the Five of Swords for too long, or maybe for just long enough to accept what's happening, and or for too long, which is also just long enough. See what I did there? Because it forces us to see what will not change, and then it forces us to change. When we're in intense scenarios like the Five, it makes us into something different. It either uncovers the truth of who we are, what we need, what we want, or is a nudge towards that future self, the one with a capital S, because where we are isn't working for us. The Six of Swords often comes up as a reminder that we're different now, and it is time to act and behave as such. Maybe what we needed when we started the business isn't what we need now. Maybe that standard we had when we started making friends 20 years ago is different now, because maybe we don't want to settle for a certain behavior from other people. Maybe our needs have changed as we've healed. The Six of Swords helps us build self-trust, compassionate self-regard, and agency by accepting reality, for seeing things as they are, not what we want them to be, for seeing how they act, not what they say, not what we want them to be, for seeing how we act, for seeing, are we acting in accordance with our values? And also knowing we're different now and we're ready to act differently now. But first comes that acceptance. The Six of Swords says, you are a different person now. You have to accept reality in order to change it. And to get more nuanced, you have to take a non dualistic approach and realize it's not all good, it's not all bad. There's always going to be a mixed bag in there, right? I also think that's key to giving ourselves closure, right? The Six of Swords wants us to forgive ourselves, appreciate the brilliance that is there, and to integrate the lessons we've learned with compassion. The Six of Swords says, I'm ready to know myself again. I'm ready to be known. The Six of Swords says, I'm ready to find acceptance about a situation so that I might go somewhere different or try something different. I'm ready to go to a safer space. I'm okay with seeking out safer spaces or truer spaces. I'm going in search of a different shore. It's okay that I'm in progress. It's okay that I don't completely know what I want. I do know what I need, and I'm following that. I know I've got to regroup. I know I've got to do things differently. I'm trying different things. I've got to trust my intuition, spirit, others. Those are some messages from the Six of Swords. This is such a spiritual process because so much of spirituality is believing in the intangible and finding hope in the dark. It's about sensation and feeling. It's about mystery, the intangible, subtle energy, thoughts, brushes with spirit or synchronicities or hanging out with the divine or hanging out in the underworld, whatever your chosen hangouts are, and allowing other things, unseen things often, hope, will, faith, to guide us. That's very Six of Swords. And if we're going back to one of the key realms of the swords, if we're going to talk about ending unnecessary suffering and constructing new identities, or maybe connecting or reconnecting to a truer identity, we have to examine our relationship to suffering, to our suffering. Is it actual suffering you're afraid of, or the fear of suffering? Is it just the simple fear of suffering that's keeping you from moving forward? And get more clear. What is suffering for you? Frustration, grief, humiliation, violence, loss, abuse. For me, it's so many things, and I think it's a really good exercise to unpack a lot of that. Define it in order to understand what's going on with any resistance you have to moving forward in the unknown. Because the irony is that, one, it is the avoidance of suffering that often leads to it or creates more. Two, fun fact, in case you didn't know, you've already suffered. You might already be suffering, right? Raise his hand. And you can do it. And you've already experienced and might be experiencing joy and beauty and love and safety and hope and promise and all the things alongside grief or confusion or pain. It's all there. Remember, non-duality for the win. Yes, and for the win. This isn't a game, but it kind of is, the infinite game. So some other good questions to ask when you receive this card is, what is my new identity? Who am I becoming? And how do they deal with suffering? How do they welcome pleasure? How are they proactive about sourcing safety and about looking for joy and play? How do they, or how does my future self or my present self, How do they create, caretake, communicate when things are amazing, when things aren't so amazing? These are all questions to ask so that the answers might give you foundations, solace, solid gold, and a roadmap to map out this next transition of your life, this next chapter of your life, because that's what you're being called to do. In many renditions of this card, there is a boat, there are people in it, they're being ferried to another shore, they're being shuttled, really, because in a lot of renditions, the people or the animals in the boat aren't, I don't know what to call it. Again, I'm like, I'll keep saying this because this is my reality. Like COVID brain, I'm like, what are they doing? Rowing? Like, do they have their hands on the wheel? Often there's someone else, some energy, some helper ferrying them to the other shore. That's how we know this is a safe passage. We know that this is about travel, literal or metaphoric. We know it's about moving on, and it's also about either being protected as you move on or having to move on so that you can gain safety from real situations, or again, more metaphoric, like new identities, but it could be literally leaving a place. This card has been called the immigrant card, the diaspora card. It tracks with being displaced. That's definitely been my experience of that with clients in my own life. And of course, the ancestral connotations, the social justice, political implications there is a whole other workshop, a whole other podcast episode. I can't get into all of that, but please know there is that very true correlation. So I would also say a keyword of this card is like a hard choice around going into a safer set of circumstances and being in that process of the unknown, looking for safety, looking for resource. Ultimately, we're also being shown a situation we maybe didn't want to move on from. Maybe we're very attached to a situation for many different reasons. This could be a choice we don't totally want to make, but we might know we have to make, right? Even though we might know it's for the best, we might feel like something has been stolen from us or we've been extracted from. The Six of Swords are about metabolizing loss. The card is about movement, a movement away, a movement towards something else that includes loss, as well as being able to recognize the gifts that loss sometimes bring. This card is often about being in the process of making that decision, being in the transitions of that decision, like moving out, sorting out stuff, like sorting out boxes and paperwork after a divorce or during a divorce. I really do not know that many people who are thrilled to be going through a divorce or a breakup where they own property together or something like that. Even if they know ultimately it's for the best, not just for you, but maybe for both of you. Saying goodbye to a friend you love and have so much fun with, but they're just not there for you in a deeper way. So you need to step back from the relationship in order to make room for intimate, balanced friendships. So there's this ambivalence when we encounter this card very often. There's a grief or sorrow with the choice we're needing to make. Or at the very least, there's sort of a maturity, a hopefulness, a hopeful soberness, perhaps, a growing up. I always think of this James Baldwin quote with lovers-related things of, Love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle. Love is a war. Love is a growing up. This is also where the acceptance comes in. The self-trust and consciousness comes in to help us be more in the spirit of love. When we're not in truth, this very swords theme, if we're not allowed to be in our truth, we're basically living out a lie or living in a lie. And then we're perpetuating superficiality and unconsciousness, which isn't good for us. It's also, again, not good for those in our community because, again, the sixes are so much about relating and community and relationships. The Six of Swords, also thinking of it as being this mini spiritual awakening. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see this pattern you have, once you see this behavior in someone else, it's hard to keep going in the same ways. So what do? You grieve. Maybe you leave. Maybe you change your behavior or your expectations. You alchemize. There's also less interpretations, of course, to all of this. Maybe you get this card and you're ready to go somewhere else with your art, Maybe you want to practice with charcoal, not oil. Maybe there's a career pivot that isn't super loaded. Maybe you're bored of being a computer programmer and you want to try something slightly different, like being a video game programmer instead of an app healthcare programmer or whatever, right? Not everything when we get a tarot card has to be so intense. Maybe you're just ready to move into a slightly bigger apartment, or you realize for so long you've been hell-bent on getting a dog, on adopting a dog. But honestly, you think about it and you're like, well, this is my lifestyle, a cat might be better, or maybe I'm just going to foster a dog for half the year. Any realization like that, any turning, any aha, that's very Six of Swords. So yes, could it be more extreme? Totally. But could it also mean trying a different dating app instead of trying to meet someone in person? Yes. Let's stay flexible and adaptive with our interpretations of tarot. I know the process of the Six of Swords very well. This literal podcast, you listening to me right now, would not exist, would not be here without this card. I think I shared it's very dear to me. I've learned the lessons of this card many different times. And part of what the process of the Six of Swords opens us up to are healing spiral moments, a major theme of the Six of Swords. Before I did this podcast, I was co-creator of another podcast called Strange Magic. I really loved the researching and the sharing I did for that project. Of course, I love talking about philosophy and psychology and magic and tarot and imagination and art and healing and literature and poetry and reality and all of it. And also, behind the scenes, I was treated pretty terribly. The collaborators weren't in alignment with my ethics or my values. I had to deal with this personal mistreatment and disrespect and just shitty behavior, lies and theft and extraction. And also ethical things like doing business in ways that I didn't feel comfortable with, cultural appropriation, transphobia, things of that nature. It ended up being a very Five of Swords situation. I was in it, It was this project I created. I worked so hard on it. There was a business that I created attached to it. I got to meet awesome people and share awesome things and know that I was being of service and helping people, but it was at an emotional and mental and energetic cost. to me and my spirit. And the cards that kept coming up when I was trying to figure out what to do for a long time were all fives. And that's always like rude with the tarot where you're like, duh, thanks. Like, tell me something I don't know. Yes, this is Five of Swords, right? And yeah, of course, it was a mirror. This is like what was going on for me experientially. Then one day, I started pulling the Six of Swords. And I knew the answer. I had to move on. There was no amount of change or conversations or contracts or boundaries or whatever. I had to let go of the healing fantasy, which I think I'll probably talk about in a minute with this card. I had to leave. Even though I felt like I owned it, even though I felt like so much of the project was mine, so much of what I did there I was proud of and I loved. But again, like after all the requests and trying to make change and having conversations about cultural appropriation for a year and all of it, like I came to acceptance. So I very much understand if you are in a hard job, a hard relationship, and you're not quite ready to leave. People will always ask. We live in such a victim blaming culture where people will always ask, well, why didn't you leave? Or it's your fault, right? You stayed, you put up with this stuff. Why did you stay? There are so many reasons. It's so complicated. There's trauma. There's wanting love. There's a foundation that's been built. There could be material ties like a marriage or business, or the fact that you spent 10 years in a PhD program, right? Before realizing like the institution wasn't going to change and you weren't treating well. There's so many Five of Swords to Six of Swords moments, Maybe you have this belief it'll change, or the person you're dealing with keeps telling us they'll change or telling us that we're the problem. There's this idea with the Six of Swords of coming to grips with the healing fantasy. And what a healing fantasy is just that. It's thinking there will be the day when things will get better. Some of you know this happens a lot with people who love bomb us, or people who make a lot of promises, or for situations where things are like very, very, very good or smoke and mirrors in the beginning. And it's this healing fantasy that we get swept up in is maybe if I work harder, maybe if I say something different, maybe if I don't say anything at all, maybe if I just tuck it in, it's not that bad. All these things we do thinking things are going to change, that one day someone's going to look in our eyes and let us know exactly what we want to hear and things will be different. I also think a healing fantasy comes in when we start confusing what we really need and what we really want for something we're not getting. So let me clarify. What I realized in a lot of my own unpacking around why I didn't leave, among many other reasons, is that the situation for me was a stand-in for something I really, really wanted, which was community, which was sisterhood, which was a coven, which was people who would support me and have my back and be intimate with me. That's like a real need that I had. And so I had this healing fantasy about the situation, but what was actually happening didn't reflect that. And I think a lot of us can sort of hold on to that illusion because we want it to happen. We want what we want so bad to happen. And if we're parentified children, if we come from parents who are emotionally immature, we're often told we're the problem. So that if we just do something different, right? If we just hamster wheel, work, or again, clench our butthole for long enough, don't say anything, let it be water off a duck's back. But gentle listener, just because we can put up with something doesn't mean we should put up with something. There's also, along the lines of trauma brain will recreate past scenarios in our histories or they stories or her stories for different reasons. When we're with people or institutions, situations who have like familiar energetic imprints or familiar like nervous system reactions to those that caretook us and in fact harmed us, perhaps, who might have similar behavioral pattern dynamics and similar energy, it feels familiar on multiple levels. And what do humans love? We love the familiar. We love to conserve energy. It is literally our biological impulse. So that's like a big one. The other is we'll step into scenarios that mimic past traumatic events we've had because on some level it gives us a semblance of control in present time, control over the past by experiencing it again. I'm going to break this down a little bit more because I can hear some of you saying, I don't know what you're talking about. What is control? It is the feeling or belief, true or false, right? Might not always be true, might not always be false. It's the feeling or belief that we know what is going to happen. Control is sometimes, but not always, a trauma response. So by knowing what's going to happen, subconsciously, we feel like we're in control, even if it's an unhealthy situation. It's that devil we know, right? We've got our devil coming back as a teacher. It's somehow better than the devil we don't until we decide to turn more into the healing spiral and break up with this pattern, form new beliefs, neural pathways, energetic programming, and behaviors. And the Six of Swords is often that cue that it's time. The Six of Swords can be an invitation for us to move more deeply into the healing spiral. What am I talking about? Again, I know some of you are like, what is she talking about? Exactly. Let me spiral it down, spiral it out. All of us have a series of wounds that become patterns because they're linked to beliefs and behavior and energetic imprints. We all have these themes that surface around again and again in our lives. And we go around them in different ways in order to experience them through different lenses, to view them from different perspectives, and to behave differently, to see them differently, to treat them differently. It's very lunar, right? Every time you greet a full moon, it's a different experience. You're a different person. You're the same person, but you're different. The moon is the same, but it's different. So a healing spiral turn is when you're in a situation or experience that triggers one of those wounds or lots of those wounds. And what I have found is that throughout time, you will meet up with these crossroads. You'll be in these crossroads moments that are opportunities to heal through exposure. Over time, through healing, they will show up in ways that often decrease in intensity, but can increase in the amount of wounds being covered. For example, I created a realm of peace in my life. Most survivors can relate to this. After a life of chaos, after a life where we don't have space to do what we want, after decades of not having agency, after so much chaos and destruction and extraction, peace is priceless to us. We do everything we can to be in peace. So this situation happened when I was in peace in my life. So the situation that happened wasn't this extreme near-death experience, which I've certainly had, but it ended up activating a lot of my wounds. The situation that happened with that past podcast It was a healing spiral moment because it was like this web of wounds. Very gothic, I know. Like disrespect, not feeling safe, overwork, worth, triangulation, being told that I was the problem when I spoke up for myself, like my identity, like literally I had to get a lawyer because they were using my literal name and my identity to promote after I left, like things like so core to things I had been working on healing forever, like public humiliation and public shunning, lack or loss of community. I lost a lot. Well, let me put it this way. I thought I had community that I didn't. And this situation exposed that, So like all of these kinds of wounds were activated in this big tangled knot linked to the situation. So, gentle listener, if a situation in your life feels really loaded and intense, you could be in a healing spiral moment. You could be asked to be healing many different deep things. Go under the surface. Apply some of the toolkits of the 6 there, that different perspective, that detachment, that consciousness, that love. These are all 6 qualities that we can apply like a balm to the wounds. Also, if you're finding yourself in a time right now where everything seems to be okay, nothing's super wrong, but you're like, I thought I dealt with all of this already, because we're in eclipse season. So things are coming up to be excavated. That's a healing spiral too. Your nervous system, your energetic body feels safe enough for things to come up and for you to process them, In my training as a witch, I think a lot about bringing in the quality of the realm as the antidote. So what am I talking about? We're in the realm of air. So if there's suffering or negative thought patterns here, what is the extreme of air that we can bring into the situation to help alchemize it? Do you need space? Do you need to communicate differently? In my case, sharing about this is part of my healing because I came from a place where I wasn't allowed to talk about harm that people have done to me, and I was punished. And so I didn't feel safe around speaking up. And so being vulnerable about my humanity and my wounds heal it. It gives them less power because I know you have them too. I'm not alone. When I decided to leave, very 6 of Swords, it didn't feel good. It felt terrible. And I had no idea what was next. I had no idea that I would end up starting a podcast, or that starting this podcast would be part of the healing process, but it was. And that doesn't mean the next stage is easy. I think I've shared this before. The first few times that I sat down to record alone in my house, no one around, I was literally shaking. That's how much my nervous system, my mind, associated a microphone with that level of unsafety. My nervous system, that air part of me that this was about, needed to rewire through practice, not through avoidance. Because ultimately, 6 of Swords is this alchemization. It is this move towards peace and space. These patterns we all have, along with requiring clarity and naming, another very Swords theme. Again, they require acceptance, space. The 6 of Swords wants us to make space to tell new stories, to not be in conflict around the wound we have. Yes, I have fear. around using my voice. And also, yes, I'm going to use my voice. Yes, I'm confused about where I'm going next. And I feel like I know what energies and essences and worlds I'm ready to welcome in. Being with something without being hooked by it. Being with something without automatically being in opposition to it, without being separate from it, but also like not attaching to it so much that it ends up controlling you. Because the fives are so intense, because you're so in it, you aren't separate from it. You're attaching to it in such a way you can't get out of it. You're experiencing this suffering, and it's so acute. It's taken up all your vision. It's taken up all your space. You can't imagine anything outside of it, which is one of the reasons why the fives are so painful. And one of the reasons why the Six of Swords comes in as such an antidote. The sixes say, let's try something else. Why don't we try peace without having to suffer unnecessarily? Why don't we break away from the paradigm that there has to be winners and losers at all? Why do we do this? I'm sure if you're listening, you have all these examples of dynamics of that in your own life, these like power plays, whether it's family or friends or work, where like everything is set up for there to be a winner and a loser, which it's not real. There's all these setups to maintain certain power dynamics and also delusion. And the thing about those dynamics and the systems that prop them up are that there's only so much you can do in them. I've shared so many times that the fives in my mind are about like the systems that we find ourselves in. There's only so many times you can recalibrate or say like, hey, I'm ready for this to be a loving collaboration, not 2 against 1 or thousands against 1. There's only so many times we can try. So how many times are you going to try? At a certain point, we've got to wake up and we do have to remove ourselves or find a way to be in alignment with ourselves and our values and really clarify what's most important to us so that we can do the work we came here to do, so that we can be who we came here to be. So the same wounds, same themes, they'll meet us many different times in our lives in different ways until we heal or make peace or acceptance with them, until we go through another layer, right? We've got these layers that we're scrubbing away on the healing spiral. It's a healing process. And also I want to remind us that healing can be play, healing can be joy, healing can be fun, healing can be doing things that resource us. So when this card comes up, think about that. I also think that sometime this month, I'm feeling like doing a Patreon only episode about going from the 5 to the 10 in the swords, like a little secret mini musing. So look out for that. I wanted to end a little bit meta in a true like Six of Swords embodiment to think about a Six of Swords perspective for when we pull a tarot card and we're not sure what our interpretation is. If you pull a tarot card and you immediately will just go to the keyword you have memorized, you go to your guidebook, and you're not picking up anything new or you're not being open to anything different and just, automatically ingesting whatever keyword or meaning was written in a little guidebook by another person you don't even know. They have no idea what's going on with you. You don't maybe even know why they came up with that interpretation. Pause and get a little Six of Swords with it. What's another perspective on this? What interpretation, motivation do I want to bring to this card? What eyes am I looking at this card from? Am I looking at this card for my future self, from my wise self? Am I looking at this card from my true self? And what are different perspectives that I can create around this image, this archetype, this code, these symbols, these teachings? What is a different, maybe even just a subtle nuance in this card that I could explore today for the entire day that might open me up, that might support me, that might give me a different perspective, more room? That is a way that we can approach our deck that is the Six of Swords in action. And questions we can think about in our lives when we're invoking this archetype are, what haven't you yet considered? What have you stopped letting yourself dream about? What are the whispers or intuitive messages you've been putting aside all year? What is the project, the idea you get so excited about and lit up about? What's a truth you could believe that would facilitate expansion and freedom and play and fun? How can you allow things that you previously attached resistance to be an experiment and learn from simply trying something different, present moment, present time, without being so attached? What would happen if things worked out? How are you letting who you want to be, who you're becoming, steer the ship of your life so you are being led by your values, by curiosity, compassion, play, experimentation, innovation? Do you need more space to do that? Do you need to put your attention more there? How? How are you going to do that? What would you need in order to do that? Who in your life needs that? Who in your life needs more space or more curiosity or compassion about who they are or where they are? How can you invoke those energies and more peace within your relationships with other people, with yourself? Those are all some Six of Swords musings, questions I will leave you with. I wanted to give you some holographic interpretations of this beautiful fractal healing card. Until soon, thank you so much for being here.